What an awesome welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to Innis Town Hall at the University of Toronto. I'm Mayoral Candidates, host of CBC Toronto News at 6. This time, in 2 weeks, you may be casting a ballot. Advance voting is underway, as some of you may know. Are you ready? If not, and you still don't know who to vote for, you're certainly not alone, which is why we hope today's conversation will help you make your decision. I am, of course, joined on stage by 6 mayoral candidates, and they will each be making their case today about why they deserve your vote. So let me introduce you, starting on my right-hand side. Furthest away is Anna Bailau, former Toronto City Councillor. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
And then we have former Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders. Hello, Mark.
Hi, good seeing you again.
You too. And closest to me on my right-hand side is former councillor and MP Olivia Chow. Moving on this way, we've got City Councillor Josh Matlow. Next to Josh, we've got former Scarborough MPP, Mitzi Hunter. And then finally, last but not least, certainly, we've got City Councillor Brad Bradford. And for our part, CBC Toronto is helping to facilitate today's conversation. It's been organized by the University of Toronto's School of Cities, Canadian Urban Institute, and the Urban Land Institute. So naturally, candidates, you could expect a lot of questions from the organizers about housing and about city planning. We have an audience in the town hall today, living up to the name. So we ask a couple of things that if you could please stay mindful of the fact that we are live streaming, and to try to avoid any kind of disruptions. Please stay respectful as well of the candidates. They have limited time to answer the questions, as well as the rest of the audience. We are all here to listen in on what will hopefully be a thoughtful conversation this afternoon. Few rules for the candidates. The University of Toronto would like to frame today as a spirited conversation. Much more than a debate. And if you have watched these candidates in action, you know they're more than capable of a spirited conversation. We are, of course, in the heart of U of T, so let's aim to have a conversation that students and young people can benefit from today. Having said that, we will still implement some debate rules. If you make a serious claim about any one of your opponents directly by name, then we will give that candidate, we'll try to give that candidate time to respond. All right, housekeeping done. Let's get this conversation going, shall we? First question, 1 minute each. I'd like to hear from the candidates. How do you define housing affordability? Let's begin on the far right-hand side from me with Anna Bailau. 1 minute.
Maribel, thank you, and thank you to all the organizers. My name is Anna Bailau. I'm running on a plan to build housing, to fix city services, but build housing and make life easier and more affordable. Access to safe, secure, and affordable housing is essential to the well-being of our residents and our communities. I believe there's nothing more foundational in people's lives than affordable housing, and I define it in 2 ways. The access to make sure that people are not being pushed out of the city, making sure that our youth, our families, and our seniors can stay in the city in a safe and secure way. But as chair of affordable housing, I'm also proud to have led the city to adopt the definition of affordable housing as 30% of households. And that's the definition that we need to use in our housing policies and the definitions that I will use as mayor of the city of Toronto. One thing that I know for sure that will not be creating affordability is increasing property taxes.
Thank you, Anna Bailau. Let's go next to Mark Saunders, your definition of housing affordability,
Great,
please.
and thank you everyone for being here. You know, in 1982, when I moved into Toronto for my first time. I remember my paychecks because 70% of my paycheck went towards rent. So I had to work off that 30%. And I understand that hardship. You know, there were 2 months a year where you had 3 paychecks, and those were the most exciting months of the year. But when we fast forward to today, when we see what the number one issue is right now, it is supply and the growth of population. That growth of population is increasing faster. People want to come here. Government's role is to create the opportunity for people to live that Canadian dream, and I had the opportunity of doing that. But if there is no place to call home that is affordable, whether you're working or rent geared towards income, we will fail. What the city needs is not more of the same, which is what you have. You want leadership, a leader who will make those tough decisions, who understands how difficult it is for affording a place to stay here. And I'll do everything that I can by cutting that red tape to make sure the processes are done within a year so that we can have more places that are affordable for everybody across the city so they have a fair chance to live here in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark Saunders. We'll go next to Olivia Chow. 1 minute.
I have a volunteer whose name is Dahlia, who just graduated from University of Toronto just a month ago. Yeah, she's amazing. Except after she paid her rent, which is $1,600 in the basement, shared with 3 other friends and share common spaces, but she has her own room, she doesn't have much left by the end of the month. And that's desperate. What's happened in the past is that this whole notion of affordable housing, the definition got twisted. Affordable housing right now is defined as 80% of market rate. Let me tell you, 80% of $2,000 for a bachelor is not affordable for most people. In my books, affordability means a third of your income. It means that you don't have to go to food bank. It means that Dahlia doesn't need to see fresh fruits and vegetables and canned soup as a luxury. That's what affordability really means.
Thank you, Olivia Chow. We'll go over on the left-hand side now. And Josh Matlow, let's begin with you.
Well, hi, everyone. Again, thank you to the organizers for putting this on for us today. And I'm running on a campaign to focus on safety, affordability, and livability. And I fundamentally know that if we don't both raise revenue, manage our budget better, and achieve a new deal with the provincial and federal governments, we're never going to be able to pay for the things that we need. So we need to be pragmatic, we need to be progressive, and we need to be honest with residents when we're running for office, let alone being in office and representing them. The definition of affordability, beyond the 30%, for example, that's CMHC says, for example, is arbitrary in many ways, if we're to be honest with ourselves. It depends on the individual. There are some people who are relying on food banks more than ever before, and their definition of affordability is going to be different than somebody who might make between $40,000 and $100,000 but still can't afford to buy a home in one of our neighborhoods. And their definition of affordability will be different from a lot of people who are renting in our city and the rents have gone through the roof and they can't afford to make their monthly rent and buy their groceries. So the reality is we're going to need not just one definition of affordability, but a range of different options and opportunities for people throughout our city, whether you're in poverty, whether you're the missing middle, or whether you're somebody who just has a dream of home ownership. And that's the way that I would approach it as mayor.
Thank you very much, Josh Matlow. Let's move on to Mitzi Hunter. 1 minute.
Thank you so much for having us here today, and thank you to the School of Cities, the CUI, ULI, and of course to CBC, because this is the critical issue in our campaign that we're running right now, which is about housing and affordability. And the reality is that this city has become unaffordable for so many. Many of our young talent is leaving our city for affordable options outside. Many people stay here until they start having families and then realize that they can't afford to live here. And that's one of the reasons I have made this the centerpiece of my platform, which is to build more affordable housing units. And I'm talking about deeply affordable, so the average market rent as set out by the CMHC and below. Those are the types of units that I'm talking about. It's not just about a definition that no longer fits people's pocketbooks because they're choosing between living and eating, and that's not right. Housing is a human right, and we need to ensure that it is affordable for people who live here and make sure that young people young adults, in fact, can afford to start their lives. You know, I have conversations even in the hair salon, and it is all about housing. It's all about people in their 40s having to get roommates because they can't afford a place of their own, and that's not how we want to see our city evolve. We've got to do something about this.
Thank you so much, Mitzi Hunter. Brad Bradford, question to you. 1 minute, please.
You know, I think for every family, every senior, every worker, it's less about the definition of affordability and it's more about a feeling. Every month, folks are holding their breath to see if the check is going to clear on the rent. They're making the decision on a monthly basis about purchasing consumer goods. They're making decisions at the grocery store. What products can they afford? They're making trips to the food bank. That's what affordability is for folks. And so, you know, aspirationally, 30% of your income dedicated to housing, dedicated to rent. But I hear from time and time again, young professionals, young families, seniors, it's 50% of their monthly income is what they're paying, sometimes more. And so affordability, fundamentally, back to that feeling, it means different things to different people. And that's why the solution to the housing crisis here in the city is to have more housing options for people. All across our neighborhood, all 640 square kilometers of this big, beautiful city, we need more housing options. We need more supply. If we have more housing options and more supply, we will have more affordability for more people. And that is what the future success of this city hinges on.
Thank you so much, Brad Bradford. Thank you all candidates for setting the table for us in terms of how you view affordability as it relates to housing in our city. We're going to go to our audience first now for a question. And this as well, you've got 1 minute to answer, candidates. So if I could ask our first member of the audience who's got a question, the mic is yours. If you could introduce yourself before you ask your question, please.
Hello, candidates. My name is Aiden Thompson, and I'm a third-year student studying international relations here at U of T. I'm also the Vice President of Public and University Affairs at the University of Toronto Students' Union. My question for the candidates is about student housing. Here at U of T and at other colleges and universities throughout our city, students are competing with non-student tenants for rentals, driving up prices for both. Do you have a plan that will directly improve the supply of student housing, and are you willing to work with student-centered, non-market actors like the University of Toronto Students' Union to get it done?
Aiden, thank you so much. Let's begin with candidate Mark Saunders to start. Thank you.
And Aiden, thank you so much for asking that question. And again, I will tell you, the number one issue has been supply, and the fact that government really hasn't taken this issue serious. I will take this issue serious. So classic example, when we talk about Scarborough and talking about rooming houses and places for students, the prices went up from $400 a room to $800 a room because there were supply issues. And not only that, you're afraid to leave, and the state of affairs were deplorable because if you left, it got taken right away, even though the prices were outrageous. So this speaks to having leadership and partnership, understanding what the problem is, making sure we create the environment to have more affordable rooming houses closer to colleges, working with the colleges, working with the associations to make sure that we get it right. Because the numbers of students that are coming here are hundreds of thousands. And here they are coming for an opportunity to have betterment in their lives, yet they can't live in the city. So you have my reassurance that that will be taken seriously. It now has been legalized so that people can at least have dignity because they will be legalized, which means stronger enforcement when it comes to inspections and accountabilities and all of those other mechanisms to make sure that you're living in a state of dignity while you're going to school and trying to be successful in life.
All right, thank you, Mark Saunders. Olivia Chow, we'll go to you next.
I've been teaching at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, and a few of my students are really stressed out because they have to travel a long way to get to campus. One student called Hamza, just in the fall term, disappeared for several weeks. I thought, and he was a really good student. I said, where did he go? And then he showed up after a few weeks. He got evicted. He ended up, he couch surfed for a while, and then ended up in a shelter. And then his laptop got stolen, which means that his world came crashing down. If you don't have your laptop, you can't get any work done, right, as a student. So it took him a while to get back on his feet. It was really tough. We used to build affordable housing with student residents right behind us on Huron Street is the campus co-op. It's a cooperative. It's affordable. It's with the students. Up the street, University of Toronto built Woodsworth. So there are a lot of things we could do collectively through a nonprofit effort and partnering with the City of Toronto. And I've done it before.
Thank you, Olivia. We will go to Josh Matlow next.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. And so begin with, absolutely, I'd be delighted to work with you and the Student Union on projects that will make life more affordable for students who come down here or want to live down here. And the first thing we need to do is ensure that there is supply of affordable housing for students near our schools. I have a plan called Public Build Toronto. Unlike Housing Now, which has failed because it doesn't have a single shovel in the ground, I'm going to be moving forward excuse me, with building affordable units, deeply affordable units, below market, and then market, but with rent control, because we can do that on our own properties, even though Doug Ford took it away from the rest of Ontario. And we're going to build that on public lands that we own right here in the core of our downtown, along with throughout the city. And I want to work with our schools to make sure, our universities and colleges, to make sure that a portion of that can be directed toward supporting students being able to live nearby where they study. I also am a big advocate for home share, which is a really creative model where there are older adults who might be house rich but poor, month to month because their pension isn't keeping up with inflation, and young adults who, want to help with chores, connect with those seniors, and can pay $500, $600 a month to be able to live in their home right in the core of the city. There's lots of different creative ways that we can make life more affordable for students, including reversing the cuts to the TTC, making sure that it's safe, reliable, and affordable. And I've got a long list. I'll get back to you about that too. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh Matlow. Mitzi Hunter, you're next, please.
Thanks, Aiden, for your question. And absolutely, I'd work with student unions. As the former minister for universities, colleges, and skilled trades, I know how important it is to have student housing close to campuses. And that's why in my plan that I've put forward, I've actually specified that there will be a student zone around and near campuses, all of the campuses that we have across the city, so that we can add those units of housing, particularly from a zoning perspective and specifically for student housing, so that you can find a place to live close to campus and be able to afford to do that. Also, with my plan to build out our transit system as well. For instance, the Waterfront East LRT already has George Bound there with 9,000 staff and students. They need to be connected to the transit system, and so I've already committed to advancing that work. I want to make sure that our students always have a place to live, work, and stay here in our city, and my plan is specifically geared towards that. So thank you so much for asking this question.
Thank you, Mitzi. Brad Bradford, we'll go to you next.
Thanks for the question, Aiden. Back in my undergrad, I lived in multi-tenant housing, rooming houses, the third rail of politics for so long in this city. And since I've become the chair of planning and housing, we've legalized it. We've legalized multiplex housing, so we have more apartment opportunities in more neighborhood. Now, that's just the beginning. That's just happened, and it's going to take a while for that to transpire across the city, but it's about more options. But let me give you an example of where the city is failing when it comes to student housing. I was approached by a builder a few months ago that had recently purchased a condo site, I think Sherbourne, Girard, somewhere in that area for TMU. It was going to be a high-end condo site, and they wanted to build affordable student housing. They needed to work with the city, not because they wanted to make the building any bigger, but they wanted some flexibility around the unit size and the unit mix so that it could be turned into student housing. The city said no. And the local councillor at the time, self-prescribed progressive, didn't stand up for that, didn't fight for that. And so these are the challenges. How do we remove barriers? How do we work with student unions? How do we work with the University of Toronto and others to make sure that we're focused on outcomes, housing outcomes, affordability for students? And I can tell you the zoning bylaws and all the rules, red tape regulation, all of those prescriptive models, that's not how we innovate. That's not how we drive solutions. As mayor, I will be committed to housing outcomes for students, driving for affordability. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to require a departure from the status quo and how we've been doing it for years.
Thank you, Brad Bradford. Final candidate to answer Aiden's question, Anna Bilo.
Thank you. Thank you, Aidan, for the question. The success of our universities, of our city, depends on attracting the brightest and the best from across the country and across the world as well. We have lots of international students, and we need to make sure that they're not worried about the safety of where they're staying, which we hear a lot, and being able to afford to pay the rent or having to decide they're going to take a course or having to pay the rent. That's why my plan will increase supply, will create greater density, and will protect renters as well. But as soon as I launched that plan, not only because you're asking, I saw the need and I committed to having an aggressive purpose-built student housing strategy. And I will bring the province and the universities. The universities need to be part of this conversation as well. Many of them have development departments. Many of them own lands. So we need to bring the province, we need to bring the colleges and universities, we need to bring the student unions and the city to develop and deliver that aggressive strategy that will have to have rent zoning, that will have to have housing close to the universities, that will have to have some exceptions done in terms of planning and zoning and alterations to make sure that we can get the housing done, and that also protects the students from predatory landlords as well, which is something that we know that happens a lot as well. So it has to be a strategy, has to be developed together and delivered aggressively.
Thanks, Anna Bailau, and thank you, Aidan, for your question. So on to the next one. Toronto is losing more affordable housing than it is adding through renovictions and the destruction of existing affordable housing units for redevelopment. So to the candidates, what specific measures would you take to protect the existing affordable rental housing stock? And to kick us off on this one, 1 minute for all of you, Olivia Chow.
Thank you for that question. Rent used to be really affordable. When I immigrated to Canada, my mom, when I was 13, my mom with one income as a hotel maid were able to pay the rent for a 2-bedroom in St. Jamestown and still put food on the table for Dad and I. You can't do that anymore. And we are losing rental stock 14 times faster than we can build them. And one of the ways we could deal with the existing stock is to, if someone is about to renovate or demolict people, that the city can work with the local residents and turn it into either a cooperative or a land trust. A land trust will allow the tenants to stay in their homes and be able to have control over their homes, and it would save the building, and it would make sure that it's affordable and secure. And that's a way to go.
Thank you, Olivia. Josh Matlow, you're next.
There's a number of ways that the city can affect protecting the affordable rental stock we have. And then I want to be just really upfront with you about the things that we need to see changed at the provincial level to do so as well. Certainly, I have a $50 million investment in MURA, which is essentially our acquisition fund to stabilize buildings that could be under threat that are currently affordable today. And that will include everything from affordable rental, land trusts, and other types of models that can work with communities to ensure that there is a stable supply of affordable rental in their neighborhoods. But we also need to make sure that we go after fraudulent landlords. Not all landlords, by the way, are bad, but when they do commit fraud and like dishonest landlord own use, for example, rent evictions and demevictions, then we need to go after them, and we need to make sure that we hold them accountable on behalf of tenants who are just being thrown out so they can make more money. They're treating tenants like just a source of revenue rather than people who have homes. And then lastly, we need to renegotiate with the government or replace the government and get a better one at Queen's Park that won't remove the rights the tenants have under Section 111 of the City of Toronto Act, that also give tenants some protections, limited, but some protections at least, when they need to leave their home when a building is being redeveloped. There's a number of things we need to do, But it won't just be as simple as just hoping or thinking that we're going to do it. We need to do all of these things together.
Thank you, Josh Matlow. Mitzi Hunter, to you. I'll just repeat the question if the audience needs to hear it again. What specific measures would you take to protect the existing affordable rental housing stock? 1 minute.
Thank you. So, I've served on the board of the United Way of Toronto, and, the vertical poverty report came out, and it was just definitely eye-opening to see the vulnerability and the risks that we have in terms of keeping that stock of housing in good state of repair. So in my plan, my comprehensive plan for affordable housing, I want to protect those units from being sold and demolished, and then we lose that rental stock. So the multi-unit residential acquisition program under my plan will be $100 million of funding so that those important units can be acquired, converted into nonprofit, land trusts, or co-ops, and also just making sure that we don't lose any unit of affordable rental housing because we need it. We can't afford to lose it. I also have provisions in my plan to keep the units in good state of repair. I've expanded the tower renewal program to not just include the environmental protections, but also the quality of life, elevators, lobby renovations, other types of things to make sure that these apartments remain livable and available for rental because we need it. We can't afford to lose not one.
Thank you, Mitzi. On to you, Brad Bradford.
I was at a slow pitch game last night, and a guy from the opposite team came over, pulled me aside, and we were talking about this. We were talking about renovictions. He lives out at Danforth and Warden, I think, and is seeing the renovations taking place in the building and people being forced to move. So what can the city do about this? I said to him, as mayor, I will make sure that before any relocation of tenants, the landlord needs to show that they have a building permit in place, that we're not just replacing a window to evict somebody, but that substantial renovations are taking place. And it's about that balance. Like, we understand that renovations need to take place. We want people to be living in good quality, affordable rental units. But the whole idea of renoviction, when somebody just says that they're renovating and then they kick the tenant out only to jack the rent up, that's got to stop. And I would just echo that the multi-unit residential acquisition program has been so important because the best, most affordable rental stock that we have in the city is the rental buildings that are already there. So we need to work with other levels of government to make sure that the funding programs, particularly with the feds, will apply to the acquisition of existing rental, because that existing rental stock is the most affordable stock that we have in the city. We got to fight for it. We got to save it.
All right, thank you, Brad Bradford. On to Anna Bailao now. 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Well, I'll pick up on the multi-unit acquisition program, which I led in the city, and it was actually a way to show the federal government how it could work, because we've been advocating for them to have it done as well, and we know that it works and has delivered, and we need to continue to invest on it. And as mayor, as I will as well. I will also create a unit, an anti-displacement unit, in the municipal license and standards and connected to building permits as well. We need to help our residents to fight these renovictions or to assess the renovations. Of course, there's renovations sometimes that the tenants can't be there, but if they can't be there, how can we protect them? But we know there are instances out there that people are getting pushed out without any reason for it. And so the city can, and under my leadership, will have an anti-displacement unit to help the tenants as well. We need to have the right to have rental replacement when a building is demolished. Doug Ford took that away from the City of Toronto. I will stand up for that. We need predictability, both for builders and for the tenants as well. Right now, nobody knows what's going on. We don't have the regulations. It's creating this world of unpredictability, and we need to build the supply. We need more rental, but we can't be building through the front door and losing them through the back door. We need to make sure that rental replacement is available, and that's why, for the time being, I will also place a freeze on the demolitions of rentals so we can have a full assessment of what impact this is having in the City of Toronto.
Anna Bailao, thank you. And final candidate to respond to this question, Mark Saunders, specific measures you would take to protect the existing affordable rental housing stock in the city. 1 minute.
Okay, great. So again, it goes back to what I said at the start. One of the biggest issues right now is supply. The existing government sat on their hands and didn't do anything while the population is increasing rapidly. We know we're going to have 500,000 more people here in the years to come. So first and foremost, making sure that some of these buildings right now that exist, as a police officer going in some of these buildings, are not in a good state, and people are in the most deplorable states. So when it comes to the demolition and things along those lines, making sure that the promissories are put in place, that they have first right of refusal to whatever new development is going to be going in. That is key and critical, and making sure that there's assistance to top them up to whatever place that they're going to be relocated at. But make no mistake about it, a lot of this has been because of flawed leadership, people that didn't take the initiative to build and continue to build. There should always be a continuous plan of development in the city of Toronto if we're going to be the best and the gold standard of what cities should look like. And you have my promise, my reassurance that I will make sure that when people are in those positions, they will be looked after with every policy put in place to make sure you're looked after properly and making sure that there is a right affordability. But when we build, we have to build more denser to recognize our growth that is going to be happening across our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Saunders. Thank you, candidates, for that one. We're going to go to the audience for our next question. And I'll start with candidate Josh Matlow for the answer on this one. So our next audience member who has a question, please go up to the microphone. If you could introduce yourself first to the candidates and to the room, and then carry on with your question, please.
Hi, my name is Chi Tam. For those who don't know me, I'm appointed here with the ULI and with the School of Cities. I graduated and trained here as a planner at U of T, and now I serve as the executive director of Kensington Markets Community Land Trust, and I'm on the board of Chinatown's Community Land Trust. So hello again to some of you who work with us. My question, to the point, Toronto has many land trusts. I'm not alone in this organizing. And for those who don't know, we are nonprofit organizations that take land off of the speculative real estate market forever to provide community use like affordable housing permanently. So I'm curious, as mayor, like Community Land Trust, what alternatives to private supply would you propose for affordable housing solutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Chi, and thanks for the work you do. The work that you're doing, the work that they're doing in Parkdale, is also an inspiration to a community that I serve in Little Jamaica. Black Urbanism TO and others are also looking at that model to be able to ensure that the community in the Eglinton West area can really control its own destiny, and it's a critical part of that. But there are many more things that we can do. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using the third sector approach, meaning yes, we need to work with the private sector, and we need to incentivize, frankly, the private sector to build more affordable housing. And yes, we need more capacity and quality, frankly, in our social housing. And we need a new deal with the province to be able to achieve that moving forward. But the Public Build Toronto model that I mentioned earlier is a model where the city doesn't rely on the private sector for their altruism. We don't rely on them to put up the risk. We move forward on our public lands. And by using that model, we can actually set what we see is necessary for affordability. Rent geared to income, meaning deeply affordable for those who need that, below market for those who need access to below market, and then for those who can't afford market, rent control, unlike what the provincial government is doing today. We also need cooperative housing, and we need to work with the federal government to really, in a meaningful way, get back into the business of supporting cooperative housing throughout our city. And frankly,
Final thought, Josh.
And frankly, when I brought up ideas like home share, there are a number of different models that are happening in our neighborhoods and throughout our city that are creative ways for older adults to be able to afford their homes, for younger adults to be able to live in our city. And we need to be more creative about how we're living together in our city because, frankly, the more that we're able to live together, work together, and be able to afford to live in an unaffordable city, the better off we'll all be. So there's no one model. We're going to need a number of models to be able to be successful, depending on the individual.
Thank you, Josh Matlow. Mitzi Hunter.
Thank you, Chi, and thanks for the great work that you're doing at School for Cities and just really a voice out there on the need to do things differently. There's a social justice and equity lens as well that I really think is important when it comes to access to housing and access to land, and who owns and who gets to participate in that. It's exactly why in my Toronto Affordable Housing Corporation, not only will I be unlocking the capacity within the city as a public builder to build more affordable housing, and it's actually the inverse of what's happening with housing now, which is 30% affordable, 70% private. Under my plan for affordable rental and home ownership, it's 77%. So it's all about, as you said, that land and that rental unit being in the city's lands going forward for people to be able to have a place to live in our city that is affordable. Under the multi-unit residential acquisition program, I will include the land trusts as part of that, as well as nonprofit models, and even partnering with organizations like Black North Initiative that are really looking at how do we get people who have been historically excluded from home ownership and participation into the space of affordable home ownership. Also, in the missing middle, I want to speak to that. So not only is it acceptable to have multiplexes now, that's great, but we need to provide homeowners with incentives. So I've put forward a $100,000 forgivable loan program so that people can renovate, make that a average market rent or below. If they choose to transfer that ownership to a family member, there will be no land transfer tax. So it is about spreading out the housing units, and even if we're acquiring one unit at a time, that it's affordable and it's capped as well. We need to bring back the caps on rents that the Ford government took away in terms of that rent control.
Mitzi Hunter. Brad Bradford, to you next.
Thanks very much, and appreciate all of the work that you have been doing, standing up the land trust. And there's a number of folks out there who have been engaged in that, but you know how hard it is, right? Like that hasn't been easy. And those are kind of the questions that we need to wrestle with. Why is it so difficult for community to come together and stand up a land trust? Why have we not seen co-op housing built at scale for decades? This is how we fix those challenges and provide the unlock so that we have alternative models of affordable housing delivery. As mayor, I am committed to pushing that forward so that we can make it easier to empower the not-for-profit sector for land trusts to engage in the new types of housing that we're seeing in our neighborhoods now. You know, multiplex is a great addition that we've just seen, but we need to work with the province of Ontario so that there are opportunities to make sure that people can purchase individual units affordably, like they do in British Columbia. That requires changes to the Condominium Act. We need to work with the federal government to make sure that not-for-profit sector has access to capital so that we're removing the barriers. I hear from the not-for-profit sector all the time, it's harder to get money from CMHC than it is from a bank. We need to de-risk and incentivize the type of lending that we want to see so that we can work with strong community partners like yourselves, like the not-for-profit sector, to have that alternative affordable housing delivery. So it's about the form of the housing, it's about the neighborhoods and where we're building it, but it's also addressing those issues that have been systemic barriers for decades and figuring out how do we unlock that so that you can deliver on your potential here in the city.
Thank you, Brad Bradford. We'll shift over to this side of the room. Anna Bailau, you're next, please.
Thank you, Shi, and thanks for all the work that the land trusts do. I had the privilege of getting one started in my own community. It's actually a sectoral one with Habitat, St. Clair's, and St. Clair's Multi-Faith, the Federation of Co-op, and a local organization, and has already been able to translate that money into actual units. But the ones that I think are really a showcase of the land trust is what happened with the single-family homes in Toronto community housing. Those 600 homes that Mayor Ford wanted to sell, that I was able to stop, that now are in the hands of 2 land trusts, and that no other politician will ever sell them again. Let's be clear of that. Now they're also even looking into adding units into it. I know that I've been talking to them, and they're looking into laneway housing, and that's why I'm creating, as mayor, a fund, a pre-construction fund, because a lot of the nonprofits and land trusts know this. An area where they have a hard time getting the funding is for that pre-construction work so that they can go to the CMHC and the federal government and get advantage of the financing. So I will have that available as well. I will also make sure that community benefit charges are done in kind and that are managed for the land trust, for nonprofits. Make sure that we are actually working with the builders and making sure that there's partnerships out there. We have really interesting partnerships happening now between many of our nonprofit organizations and builders. We need to incentivize that in order to strengthen our nonprofit sector. Our key thing is to strengthen our nonprofit sector. How do we make sure they own more so they leverage more? How do we make sure we have more land in their hands so they leverage more? How do we have more units so they leverage more and facilitate, understand where they have the pinch points, like the pre-construction area, finance those areas
Anna.
for that to make sure that we make it easier. And that's what I will be doing and focusing on as mayor.
Thank you very much. Mark Saunders, to you.
Great, and thanks, Chief, for all the nonprofit work that is done. You know what? The city needs to wake up just a little bit more. There's been a lot of talking about this, but whenever I talk to people in that sector, the thing that I hear over and over again is the processing, getting through, cutting the red tape, and all the complications that it takes to get something done. So I'll definitely be working to make sure that things are happening, and also working with the federal government and trying to cut that HST incentive so that when we're talking about large-scale projects, there's an opportunity to have more of an inviting environment so we can create much more affordable housing across the city and having the right leadership and people in place to make sure that that gets done.
Thank you, Mark Saunders. Olivia Chow.
Yes, thank you for all the work you've done, especially together with Kensington Land Trust. Wow, it's happening. And the program, everyone talked about the multi-res acquisition fund, only have 10 million in it. So let's, with me as mayor, multiplied by 10 times and make it 100 million. So that would encourage all the good work that you've done. And there are other forms. And I agree with most of what I've said earlier, that the city needs to come back to build housing. Because we've been away for too long, over a decade, and you're seeing the impact of it. If we come back to actually build housing, then we can do a lot of creative work because we have land. 8,000 pieces of land on top of libraries, community centers, everywhere. So we could do creative things with the communities, whether it's land trusts or churches or union halls or nonprofit organizations. We can do creative cooperatives. We used to win awards in Canada, and we were top of the world in Istanbul getting awards for mixed income housing cooperatives. Let's go back to it because we know how to do it. And we just need to have the political will and put aside this ideology that only private sector can do it. No, land trust, nonprofit can do it. So can government. So let's build that piece back up because that piece has been missing for far too long, creating a deep, affordable housing crisis.
Thank you, Olivia Chow. Thank you, all candidates, and thank you, Chi, for your question too. So, candidates, last month, City Council declared homelessness an emergency, with almost 11,000 people experiencing homelessness in just the last 3 months and more than 3 deaths per week. How will you work with resources from all levels of government to spark a supply of housing beyond shelters to address our growing homelessness crisis? Let's begin with Mitzi Hunter, and again, 1 minute each, please.
Thank you. And, as I said in my opening, that I believe that having a home here in Canada is a human right. It's a right of every person to have a safe place to call home. When I was just late in my teens, I had a job at a call center, and one of my work colleagues actually became homeless. And my mom and I visited her and her 2 sons, and they were in a very small motel room on Kingston Road. Every time I go by there, it just brings back that memory. And my mom actually said, "You can come live with us." And, we had our own small flat, and we created a space for them in our living room. And that's where they lived until they got their own place, which we helped them find. So, we have to make sure that our city is addressing this. I have 2,000 supportive housing units as part of my plan to get people off the streets, out of ravines, and out of our transit system into supportive housing so that they can have the wraparound care and support that they need to stay securely housed. We know that mental health, addiction, substance abuse are part of why people are falling off the housing ladder and experiencing homelessness. So I do have a mental health and wellness strategy as well. In addition to that, we have a spectrum of housing that's needed. So there's supportive housing, there's deeply affordable housing. 2,100 of my units are well below the average market rent that's set out by CMHC. The bottom line is that we have to give people the dignity and the respect and the right to housing in this city, and out of temporary hotels, which is costing the city over $300 million anyways. So let's do this right.
Thank you, Mitzi Hunter, Brad Bradford. And the question is, how will you work with resources from all levels of government to spark a supply of housing beyond shelters?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it is going to take a whole of government approach to resolve the homeless and housing crisis. In my community, I built 59 supportive housing units. It wasn't easy to do. There was a lot of pushback, but it's all about giving the folks a dignity of a roof over their head and the support so that they can be successful. I sat down with CAMH a couple weeks back, and they said, folks who are experiencing homelessness, the biggest challenge is the stability of housing and, of course, opportunity to income and employment. We need to make sure that we're delivering housing for people. The city has gone from 6,000 shelter beds to 9,000 shelter beds over the past few years. They're always full, 99% full all the time. And what's really important, back to the point about other levels of government, 30% on any given night, 30% of those shelter beds are occupied by refugees. We're a caring and compassionate city, and we want to help. But those are unilateral decisions with respect to refugees and asylum seekers that are made at a federal government level. And the City of Toronto is left holding the bag. So we need a sustainable arrangement there that recognizes we're going to be part of the solution, but we need those levels of government to step up. Supportive housing is the solution, though. We have to do that all across the city. It can't be one-off buildings. Folks can't live in parks. It's not fair to the people who are living there. It's not fair to the folks who want to use our park system. It's not decent. You got to have housing. We have to build it faster. Supportive housing is the key. And I would just say, I know over time, the $4 billion Rapid Housing Initiative program by the federal government, the $4 billion housing acquisition program, those are great. But we have enough projects here in the City of Toronto to spend $4 billion from a national program. So they need to make sure that they're matching the funding levels with the order of the magnitude of the crisis. We need to do a lot more of that here in the city.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for acknowledging your overtime. Everyone's overtime, to be fair, and just a little bit here. Okay, yes, Mark Saunders, I will say you did stick to time. But this is a conversation, and it just goes to show how important this conversation is, and the questions from the audience in particular have been very, very good. So definitely worthy of a response, and a meaty one at that. But I will ask you to try to stick to time, because there's a lot more questions that we do want to give appropriate time to, and to have a discussion. So Anna Bailau, sorry for keeping you. You're next, please.
Thank you. And before I answer your question, I just want to mention something. When we're talking about homelessness, obviously the answer is housing, and in many cases supportive housing, but just as important is the prevention aspect of it, is making sure that people are not falling into homelessness. And I'm sure there'll be other questions where I can talk a little bit about that, but on the creating more housing, supportive housing is essential to deal with homelessness. Modular supportive housing has been proven in this city. Brad talked about 59. I've done one of the first two projects with 44 in 6 months. And as mayor, I will double the amount of modular supportive housing in this city. We've worked with the federal government and the provincial government on operating dollars for the modular homes on capital for the federal as well. We also need to, and I, as mayor, I will go to the provincial government with the numbers that can show them that they need to start treating supportive housing as healthcare. You know, UHN actually did a project with the City of Toronto that I led on supportive housing. And on that day, the CEO said 250 homeless people had done 15,000 visits to the ER. That's more than once a week. And he said, we need to start prescribing housing. So this is not only the right thing to do, this is the fiscally, economically smartest thing to do. And that's why all three orders of government need to come together to deliver aggressive supportive housing, and modular is a good way to do it because we can do it quickly and address this issue. I would also emphasize the need for the federal government to have a different stream for the 1/3 of refugees that we currently have on our shelter system is not good enough to come with a check at the end of the year. We need to work together to make sure that these almost 3,000 people are not ending up on our shelter system.
Thank you, Anna Bilow. Mark Saunders.
Thank you. And again, this speaks to leadership and cost. So first, the leadership piece. I think that there are a lot of plans that are in play and a lot of things that have been said by a lot of people who are in the positions that should have done. And that's part of the reason why we're here. So identifying why this is a serious issue that requires the leadership, and it stops with leadership. That's why I'm running. I want to make sure that we do create the environment that we can build, and we can build faster so that we can hit those targets. The target was designed for 40,000 affordable units, and I want to hit that target. And I want to make sure that I cut that red tape and make sure that we have the navigating system put in place so that these approvals can be done within a year and not the average of 3 to 5 years that is taking place right now. If that creates a healthy environment for the builders to come in and build, then our city is in the starting process of moving towards success. I fundamentally disagree with city or government building. They continuously get in their own way. When you look at housing now, they had their own property and there's still not a shovel in the ground. Creating the environment is government's role. And when we start getting government involved in building, with Ms. Chow, with all due respect, she's not giving you the amount that she's going to tax you for this to happen. It is going to be extraordinary. My team has put it together and we're looking at 25% of taxes to do this. We are in a time of affordability right now. This is not the time to hurt people from getting food off their table or places to stay in. So I'm suggesting making sure the environment is created by government and then working with the people to build and also build the infrastructure pieces in place to make our city a healthy environment again.
All right, Mark Saunders, thank you. Olivia Chow, you may respond, but also have your 1 minute to answer the question, please.
Well, people that are homeless are human beings first. Let us treat them as such. And let us think about all of what has just been said. I said earlier, one of the fatal flaw in the past 10 years is just completely dependent on a private sector. And we just heard that a minute ago. Private sector can't do everything. The government has a role to play. And we have done it before. We built 32,000 units of housing before. Let's go back and do it. Whether it's supportive housing or affordable housing, rent geared to income housing, mixed income housing, cooperatives, we can do it. Yes, it requires us contributing a bit. It will require a modest increase of property tax. But let me tell you, it is far more expensive putting all the homeless folks in shelters, in jails, in any number of things, because the shelters is full right now. 200 or 300 people each night in this pouring rain have no place to stay. What do we say to them? Yes, we build affordable housing. It takes at least the fastest is 2 years. What do you do now? Where do they go? That is the crisis. That's why it's the emergency. That's why under my plan, I would immediately have rent supplement program. What does that mean? That means we top up their income. They have some income, especially if they are disabled, they get an ODSP as pension, disability pension, but it only pays $500 or $600 a month. How are you going to rent a room for $500 a month? Barely a washroom you can rent. So you top it up. Once you have shelters, then you can, in fact, heal. You can deal with some of the demons that some of them have. Some of them have no problems just holding down the housing. Then we could do the support housing, the wraparound services that we all agree we need, whether it's mental health or
Final
or
thoughts,
treatment
Olivia. We've got to move
programs.
on.
So that is the holistic plan in dealing with the homelessness crisis in front of us.
Thank you, Olivia Chow. Josh Matlow.
Homelessness is a vicious cycle in our society. The real way to address homelessness is to ensure people have homes. And I agree, both preventatively, to make sure that we have places that people can afford to live in, that they're not forced to make decisions between groceries and being able to make the rent, and perhaps even not be able to make the rent or pay for the groceries at all. We need to make sure that individuals who need mental health support and addiction treatment have access to those. That does not describe everybody in our streets and parks, but for those who need it, it should be accessible and ready for them. We need to make sure that as a Band-Aid approach, the shelter system is safe. Our environments that individuals who are in our parks and our streets know they can go to, along with 24/7 respite centers throughout the year for people so that they don't die in our streets. And ultimately ensure, and my plan, by the way, at votematlow.ca, it's great detail, not only demonstrates how housing and homelessness are interconnected and need to work together to make sure that we deal with both emergencies, but also I show you how I'm going to do it and how I'm going to pay for it. And my greatest frustration when I hear some of these comments today is that, with all due respect, Olivia Chow talks caringly about the issue, but doesn't show how she's going to pay for it. And then Mark Saunders, it seems like the only government built housing he supports are penitentiaries. And that's not good enough.
So what I've got to do is give 30 seconds to Olivia Chow and then 30 to Mark Saunders to respond to Josh Matlow. Olivia,
Who's first?
you may go.
Okay,
Sure.
All right.
yeah.
All right. Well, you know where specifically for homelessness, people that are buying homes that are worth $3, $5, $10, $20 million, they can afford to pay a bit more. You know, the $20 million homes have a private squash court in it. If you can afford to buy it, you can pay a bit more. And that money, called mansion tax, the land transfer tax, will come directly in paying for the support that we're offering for people that are homeless. The other part is speculators that leave their homes, their housing empty, evicting people, can pay a bit more in the vacancy because they're leaving it vacant, they're evicting people in the middle of a housing crisis. They can pay a bit more in the vacancy tax from 1% to 3%. That would net you $43 million, enough to pay for what I was just describing.
Thank you. Mark Saunders, your chance to respond.
Great, thank you. And I still say it's the 25% property tax increase that will be incorporated. My plan speaks to the mixed.
I really don't know where you got that
mixed,
number. But
I had the team put it together, and I think they're generous with that tax increase. But anyway, my plan speaks to the mixed income program. So when we look at the project at Regent Park, where it speaks to the TCHC footprint taken off, and then we build, and that has rent geared towards income, workforce, affordability, as well as market value. When we mix those incomes together and build a location, it is healthier. It doesn't just put people in geographics in clusters. It promotes opportunity for good development, and we've seen the success behind it. So I'm not sure where the penitentiary came in, but anyway, it's bringing developers in, working with. It's about creating the right environment to build. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying I do not think the government is the first stop when it comes to building places. I think they create the environment and stay in that lane, and I think that's our better chance for success.
That's time for response. Thank you, Mark Saunders. We're going to move on to another audience question now. And the first candidate to respond to this question will be Brad Bradford. Once again, 1 minute each. If you could please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Yes, sure. So my name is Cheryl Case. I serve as the founder and executive director of CB Planning, a nonprofit that implements a human rights approach to planning in Toronto and other cities in Ontario. My question is, in response to calls from grassroots communities across the city, Toronto City Council has acknowledged structural racism in the planning of housing. Of note, exclusionary zoning in residential neighborhoods and BIPOC community displacement. Little Jamaica serves as an example of how, when unresolved, such public policy results in BIPOC and in particular Black residents experiencing higher rates of deep housing precarity and poverty. what do you see as the single greatest challenge to validating the solutions put forward by community organizations? And what measures will you take to address it? Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, and for all of your continued work and advocacy. It's making our city better and more inclusive. And to your point about exclusionary zoning, I mean, this is the status quo, perpetuated over a century, but even more recently post-amalgamation. The Yellow Belt, neighborhoods that have effectively been off limits for anything other than a single detached house. And we know that a single detached house has a lot of connotations. Who has access to that type of ownership and form of housing? And it falls far too often on socioeconomic, racial, religious lines. And that has to stop. We have taken steps, as Chair of Planning and Housing, to end exclusionary zoning. We have now gotten rid of RD, the most restrictive form of zoning in the city, residential detached, and we've opened that up to multiplex so that we have more access for more people to more neighborhoods. That's how we have to do it. But we also have to look at more affordable options for both rental and ownership. And the reality is, we're going to have to work with financial institutions. Black North, for example, is a great organization that's doing that type of work where we can provide pathways to equity so that people can get into the market. The old historic model that financial banks and institutions have been using for years and years means that a lot of people are cut out of that conversation. They never have access to that opportunity. Innovation is required. Shared equity models are required. Working the not-for-profit sector, making sure that people can build equity, and as the market moves up, they capture some of that and they have access to get in there. But ending exclusionary zoning, which we have done, more housing for more people in more neighborhoods, and innovation when it comes to shared equity models to purchase affordable home ownership across the city. Those are some of the things we have to do.
Thank you, Brad. Anna Bailao.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think this is an area that we can recognize that we need to do more. I'm proud that under my leadership, the City of Toronto adopted housing as a human right. We're starting to see those lenses being applied. Rooming houses, the approval of the rooming houses had a human rights lens on it, and I think it did well on the policy that we ended up with as well. Obviously, we need to have that with our Indigenous reconciliation and anti-Black racism lens as well. But I think that also the fact that we have a deputy ombudsman on housing as well is going to be helpful. So all this will be helpful. As mayor, I'm committed to end exclusionary zoning. I'm committed to have the human right lenses on our policies, and I'm committed to having partnerships like we're leading at 140 Merton, where these are Indigenous housing led. This is very important, led and for Indigenous communities as well. And being the first councillor that was able to deliver 40 units of ownership as well for Black North, which is providing ownership opportunities for Black communities here in our city. These kinds of partnerships and allowing the communities to deliver that housing is essentially. And it's about affordable housing and cultural sensitive housing as well. We need to ensure that those two go hand in hand and that we recognize that.
Thank you, Anna Bailao. Mark Saunders.
Cheryl, thank you for asking that question. And it spoke to the BIPOC community and disparities that are going on. So when we look at the stats, and it states that 75% of the white population in Canada has higher income and higher home ownership. And then when we look at the BIPOC community, which is 69% lower income and rental, right away we see a disparity there. So making sure that we have right initiatives put in place. So Black North was one of those initiatives, did a fantastic job. I worked with them and saw and understood its need. So looking towards plans and opportunities where we do speak about the equity, we do speak about affordable ownership, which is key and critical, is a key direction to move. And you spoke about Little Jamaica. It's understanding how important that was, because when I lived in Milton, in a very small town, we would come up to Little Jamaica because it was the only spot in the country at the time that had a small section of property where people looked like us and had our culture, where we could buy those foods. So making sure that specific supports are put in place to keep that investment going so that these types of things stay here, that the LRT ruined that area. And so we need to make sure that we work to fix it and make sure that we have its vibrancy live long so that we can understand what Canada is all about.
Thank you, Mark Saunders. Olivia Chow.
a lot of solutions have been suggested. Anti-Black racism lens. The City of Toronto has the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Plan, and a big piece of it deals with housing. Talking about Little Jamaica, for example, they have a land trust group led by Dane Williams, and they're looking for a place. They need support, they need guidance, they need financial support on it, right? And we need to do everything we can to support Black-led initiatives. The same thing with the Indigenous community. I know the Native Center, for example, are looking at different types of housing. And also, it's not just about building housing, it's about the rent supplement program, the various programs that is being administered by the City of Toronto. All of it needs to be regarded and through a anti-racism lens.
Thank you, Olivia Chow. Josh Matlow.
I'll say yes and to a number of the very thoughtful comments that the other candidates have shared with you, Cheryl. But as you know, whether it be the Village, Chinatown, Little Jamaica, supporting our Indigenous residents, we need to do better to make sure that we include and celebrate and support the diverse cultures that we have in the city in an equitable way. And in Little Jamaica, I mean, there is a history of racism when it comes to planning here in Toronto and throughout North America and around the world. And we should say that, and we should acknowledge that. The reality is, in most cities historically, whenever there's been a major infrastructure project or the pressure of gentrification, Black communities have been the first to be displaced. And historically, it's been expressways, but in Eglinton, it's been an LRT. Now, the transit is going to be great once it's built, hopefully in the next 100 years. But meanwhile, we need to make sure that, and we've worked together on motions along with the community to ensure that there is focus from City Hall on this. But I also want to say, admittedly, I don't think City Hall has done well enough, even on the plans that it has. It's gone too slowly. The consultation has not been consultative well enough. And as mayor, I'm going to make sure that we get moving with the cultural district plan. We ensure that we move forward with investing through CBCs and MURA and other sources into land trusts, and ensuring that both the residential community along with the Black-owned and operated businesses in Eglinton, like Laurie Beezer and many others who are starting farmers markets and really helping revitalize the area, are part of both celebrating the history of Little Jamaica, in this context specifically, but just as importantly, if not more, ensuring the future of it.
Thank you, Josh Matlow. Mitzi Hunter.
Thank you, Cheryl, for all the work that you've been doing on this and raising voice. We've got to take strides to correct the imbalance and the injustices. If you look at my plan, I have applied a human rights, equity lens, social justice lens to a lot of the proposals that I'm putting forward. So for the increases to the multi-unit residential acquisition program, 20% would be for Indigenous housing acquisition, because it's extremely important that we do that. For my Toronto Affordable Housing Corporation, which is going to be building 22,700 units of affordable housing, I've identified the Black North Initiative as a nonprofit partner to work with us to identify streams of individuals who need access to that affordable housing. It's not just for renters, it's also for home ownership equity as well, where those units would be offered, 6,100 of those units would be offered at 50% of the market rate, so that we can get people into home ownership equity as well, particularly groups that have been historically denied and has been seen to be on an ongoing basis. By human rights and equity, I mean even just the state of repair of the units themselves, and making sure that units are, first of all, there's inspection of those units. I'm increasing the number of inspections through the municipal licensing and standards, making sure we increase the opportunity for people to have their units in a good state of repair, also standing on the side of renters, having rent advocate, and tripling the amount of rent bank so that people can stay and keep their housing units. There's a lot that we need to do. It's not one solution.
Gotta move on, Mitzi.
It's a multi-pronged approach that we need to take to housing affordability and accessibility in our city.
Thank you. We've just got time for a couple more. And this next question is just got a little bit of time to give you for it. But we want to talk about accessibility too and addressing that as an issue in the city. As mayor, what commitments will you make to ensure that universal design for all people, including senior citizens, is embedded into future public and private residential developments? And we'll start once again from my furthest right here, Anna Bialau, please.
Thank you. I'm committed to work with the private sector and with the nonprofits to make it happen. But I have to say this. I mean, we have to get ready for an aging population to ensure that we have housing with that is accessible for people with disabilities. But I've been hearing Olivia Chow answer question after question after question. And the bias towards builders in the city is just unbelievable. You will not solve housing in the city without builders at the table. Let's make this clear. We need to build 285,000 units in the city. The city is growing. We need all the partners we can get. We need actually the partnerships between the nonprofits and the builders. And this anti-bias, this anti-private sector that I've seen is actually extremely concerning.
So, Anna,
Somebody's, okay.
I got to give Olivia Chow time to respond to that before we move on, and I'll give you the rest of your time back there.
Well, for 14 years, I represented downtown Toronto, including University of Toronto. And guess what? Look at all the development by the private sector right here in downtown Toronto. You see City Place, those private developments, all the condominiums coming in, but they did it with, you know what? 2 schools, a community center, a park, a
How much
library,
affordable housing?
And there are 2
How
pieces
much?
of land. Excuse me, Anna, you should
How
know
much?
that. There are 2 pieces of land that are
I know.
designated at affordable housing and a $6 million in the reserve funds. It's a comprehensive neighborhood, and it even have a child care center and a library in it, right? So no one that have worked with me in the downtown area. Look at the Kings, the entertainment district, the Liberty Village. Look, who built those buildings? Private developers. How do you think they got built? By working with their local councillor, Olivia Chow. So
And that's time, Olivia. Anna Bialau, I think you've got just a few seconds left of your time.
I just, we need to have everybody involved. And she thinks it's all only taxes and government and more bureaucracy and plans that is going to deliver affordable housing. What we need is to have 3 orders of government. We need to have builders at the table, and we need to have the nonprofit housing at the table. And Olivia Chow thinks that the only way that she's going to deliver affordable housing is through taxes and bureaucracy and the government. And on top of it, we need to accelerate. We need more supply. We need more housing in this city. And she doesn't acknowledge that. She does not work with the private sector to deliver housing in this city.
I've got to get us back on track here. The question was about accessibility as it relates to housing. So, Mark Saunders, to you then, as mayor, what commitments will you make to ensure that universal design for all people, including senior citizens, is embedded into future public and private residential developments?
Great. My Toronto includes everybody. It includes everybody. And I can tell you recent government does not do that. So first and foremost, understanding that almost 25% of all Canadians live with disability. It's actually 22, but you might as well round it off to 25. This is not a discussion that has been had at City Hall. You'll have my reassurance that this discussion is had at City Hall, making sure that developers are involved in this process. Again, I'm a firm believer that government is supposed to create the environment, not be the environment. And so I do agree, to a certain extent, that the way that Olivia is going is not necessarily the best way to go. And the reason why she's not given the full picture is because she's going to tax everyone substantially to make her vision work. I want to make sure that the people that know how to build are here to create that environment that includes people that live with disabilities, especially when we know that the demographics right now, 65 and older is moving at a rate 6 times faster than 14 and under. And if we don't recognize that that is our community, and if we don't build towards that, then we are setting up for failure. As leader, I'll make sure that that is included in our discussions going further.
Thank you, Mark Saunders. Olivia Chow will give you a little bit of extra time to respond to Mark Saunders, but you have the floor.
But let me talk about accessibility first, because that is your question after all. Asian daughter, mom lived with me throughout my entire life, mostly after I graduated from university and earlier on. And she needed electric lift because she has serious rheumatoid arthritis and she's in a wheelchair. As she aged up past at 94, I know what accessibility means. It means ramps, it means bigger washroom, it means electric chairlifts. All of those things need to be planned ahead. Yes, we have an aging population. We could have high standards so that people don't have to move. They could stay and age in place, which is ideal. And not only do we need to plan accordingly and design the houses accordingly, we also need to make sure there are services that are connected, because some of the seniors would need home support workers to come in and help out. So all of that, I believe Toronto has a accessibility advisory committee, and the city have a multi-year accessibility plan. All of that also you have to add the province of Ontario that have the ODSP, Ontario Disability Pension Plan, needs to be a bit higher so that seniors can actually able to live in dignity, because that dollar amount right now is way too low. Okay, having said
Close
all
to
the
time,
stuff
Olivia.
about accessibility, I keep hearing people being obsessed with taxes. I think I should address that. You know, look, in the
15
last
seconds, please.
30 seconds. Okay,
15.
15.
Thank
okay.
you.
I'll give her my minute if she wants to talk about how she's going to tax.
Look, in the past, our city have gone the wrong way, the way they were doing the budget. They picked a number arbitrary and then stuff everything in it. It doesn't work. This is the last decade. We need to have a people-centered approach, look at what's needed first, look at different source of revenue, and then ask the federal and provincial government to join with us. That's when we set the rates. Because you know what? You have no idea, and we have no idea what's the interest rate in the coming March. So how can we say
Gonna move on,
what
Olivia.
the percentage would be? Thank you.
Thank you. Josh Matlow.
Where this
Accessibility is
no.
the
I
question.
was
Yes.
I was actually just going to say, like, where all this has gone is everywhere but accessibility in the last few comments. And I hear from people with disabilities all the time who, along with asking for policy improvements, just say, like, can you mention us? Like, we're never seen. It's true. We're never seen when politicians talk about how to plan a city or public policy. So the first thing we need to do is ensure that they are seen and they are heard and they are served as well as anybody else in our society, because they could be a member of our family, our neighbors, and one of us any day of our lives. So the reality is we need to create an age-friendly city, and I have a plan to ensure that we do. I've been the Toronto Seniors advocate, and I initiated the senior strategy for that very reason. We need to ensure that units that are built in Ontario, and here in particular in Toronto, more and more need to be accessible, so no one ever needs to think, can I go over for dinner with friends or see family, and maybe I won't be able to actually enter their home. That's not a society that has integrity and inclusivity. We need to make sure, though, that it goes beyond housing. It's playgrounds, it's parks, it's sidewalks, it's everywhere. If we plan a city that is genuinely age-friendly, it's good for seniors, some with mobility challenges. It's good for young parents pushing a stroller. If we clear the sidewalks of snow, we won't have to walk out into a live lane of traffic anymore. And it's good for a middle-aged person in a wheelchair. That is my commitment to you as your mayor. This city is beyond hyperbole when we say a city for all and a city for everyone. We need to mean it, and we need to put it into policy. That is my plan, and that is my commitment.
Thank you, Josh Matlow. Mitzi Hunter.
Thank you, and very important question. It's one that I hear as I'm talking to people right across the city. Accessibility is an important aspect and is definitely part of the work that I will be doing as mayor in the city, is to ensure that we have an accessible city. Universal design really should be just a starting point, because if we design universally, then everyone will have access and we won't have any problems whatsoever. And so for the work that I'll be doing directly as part of Toronto Affordable Housing Corporation will ensure that that lens is applied, but really right across, weaving that standard into the city's policies. I do want to say, with the remaining time I have left, listening to the comments from Anna and Olivia, Anna was part of the Housing Now. No unit of housing is available for people to live in, despite the fact that we have a mounting and a growing affordable housing crisis in this city that needs to be solved. And the developer of first approach, you should know, is not working and will not work. We need to prioritize housing affordability and where the city becomes the builder of those units and makes them deeply affordable. And Olivia, we are not in the 1990s. We need 2023 solutions to deal with the challenges that we have today. And that is the focus that we have to have and the vision that we have to have for our city. We cannot go backwards. We have to go forward as a city, and we need solutions that deal with the today's problems. I too was there when the Liberty Village and the Distillery District was created. I was in the private sector at that time and encouraged the corporation to invest in critical infrastructure in terms of fiber optics, which led to the live work spaces that we have there today and allowed the private sector to build and to flourish on that type of infrastructure.
Okay, Mitzi,
but we
I gotta
need
give
more
time for
solutions
response.
because our city is at a point where it could be a breaking point, and we have to steer the city forward into the future.
Okay, Mitzi, I've only got 20 seconds for each candidate to respond. Anna Bilo, 20 seconds to you.
Well,
Please try to stay to 20.
We know that governments had been stepping away from housing for a long time. I was able to bring the city back into the housing business. I think almost every answer that I gave, you heard me said, I led this, I introduced this. Does the Housing Now have some challenges? Absolutely. Like many projects, unfortunately, are facing challenges in our city because of the market conditions. And this one has had specific challenges due to market conditions, but also some challenges inside the city. That's why, as mayor, I will make sure that if there's no shovel in the ground for 1 year, in the first year, I will retender those projects. But there is no reason to not have those projects being produced, because go to West Don Lands,
That's
and
our time.
this summer there'll be units actually open there of affordable housing with the development.
20 seconds to you, Olivia.
Missy, your plan and Josh Matlow and my plan all have the city coming back as a developer. I see no difference, and whether you call it old or new, it's still the government playing a role.
Can I just clarify? Because
We've
my
got to
plan
get Brad's response in, Mitzi. I'm sorry, and we're running out of time. I have one last thing to ask each of you, and that's your final thoughts, and you can put whatever you choose to put in there. Brad Bradford, final candidate to respond to our question on accessibility, please.
Yeah, accessibility, sure. It's very important, right? And as our population continues to age and grow, we need to be very mindful and conscientious in the way that we build our buildings. However, we have just discussed all of the challenges that are in front of us when it comes to building here in the city of Toronto. We have green standards. We have different programs to make our buildings more efficient. The point I'm making here is that we need to be very aware of the additional costs that we are adding to construction. And that's why, rather than legislating additional barriers, rather than putting up more roadblocks, we need to incentivize ways to get the outcomes, like we have with green standards, like we have with inclusionary zoning, bringing in policies that encourage the building sector to do more and build complete communities, rather than putting up more barriers that will make housing more expensive. And I would just add that this conversation about what has happened in the downtown, the conversation from the front runner around ODSP and rent supplements, it comes back to affordability. It comes back to affordability. How many $20 million houses with squash courts exist in Toronto? There's a handful, but I don't think it's going to fill $1 billion budget gap. How many vacant homes exist in Toronto after the report just came back? The answer is 2,100. We originally thought it was going to be 50,000. So I'm in a room full of very smart people, folks who are a lot smarter than I am, and you need to ask the questions when you hear this sort of rhetoric, when you hear this hyperbole, how are these things going to be paid for? Because it's very easy to just sort of throw these things out here on a debate stage, but the math doesn't add up. So we're not going to get more housing outcomes built. Government is not going to do that. It's not about building more bureaucracy to build more housing. We have seen successively, program after program, shortcomings. We need to remove barriers, and we have to be honest about what it's going to cost. And I think that the idea that we're going to step in for other levels of government that are better positioned to deliver on this, I don't think that's realistic. And I think we have to be honest when we throw out vacant home tax, when we throw out MLTT on $20 million mansions with squash courts. Ask yourself how many of those are trading on the market today and what the opportunity is to generate revenue on it. And then about the shortcomings and the gaps in the budget with some of the proposals that you're hearing from these candidates.
Brad. Thank you.
I waited a long time.
Thank you. There'll be opportunity for all of our candidates now to wrap up their session and share their final thoughts. We are actually over time, but we're going to make time for this because it's important for you. Each of you here has a housing platform. You've all talked a little bit about it and shared some detail. So the final question is, tell us why Torontonians worried about housing and affordability should vote for you on June 26th. We'll begin with Mark Saunders. 1 minute each, otherwise we're going to lose our live stream.
Okay, great. First off, if you want to find out more information about my plan, please go to marksaundersfortoronto.ca. I came here with my parents as immigrants. We understand the journey for newcomers. We also understand the journey that people are going through right now in certain sections of this city that are invisible to the rest of City Hall. I have worked across the city and I've seen a lot of things. Affordability is the #1 issue, and especially when it comes to a place to live. And it also creates a certainty for businesses to want to come into our city and have businesses. So having affordability, not just for geared towards income, but also for the workforce, is what's going to create a vibrant, exciting city. If you vote for me, what you're voting for is leadership, experienced leadership to make an understanding that this is a priority. The focus will be on it because it will be one of the cornerstones to how this city is going to move forward, but more importantly, the 500,000 people that are going to be coming in here that have to continue our success story as a country because we represent 20% of the GDP. You have my promise and commitment that it will stop with me, and I'll make sure that we will build, not just talk about building, because that's what the city wants, that's what the city demands, and that's, most importantly, what the city needs right now. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Mark Saunders. Olivia Chow.
There's a lot of talent in this room, a lot of intelligence. You are trained to build. You're trained to be a planner. What I want you to do is when you graduate, or you've already graduated, to spend all your energy helping the city to build and build and build. And not worry about where you're going to live and whether you're going to be able to afford rent. Okay, that's #1. #2 is that what is most important is for the city to approve things a lot faster. What is happening is that I know of affordable housing builder, whether it's a mosque or a Chinese cultural center, they have to plan. They got the money, they got the land, and yet it got stuck at City Hall for 1 year, 2 years, sometimes even 3 years. So we need to make things a lot faster. You've heard about my plan to build 25,000 units of housing, protect the renters, deal with the homelessness. I invite you to check on my website, oliviachow.ca, on the plan. Everything in there is fully costed.
Thank you, Olivia. Josh Matlow.
So yes, my website is votematlow.ca, and on that very long ballot of yours, I'll be number 72. You have to state it because it's so long. You know, when we focus on affordability, my platform, my plans are not just about getting elected. It's about being elected your mayor so I can actually go and lead and make our city more affordable. That's what I'm doing. That's why my plan is thoughtful, it's evidence-based, It's costed, and I tell you exactly, unlike many other candidates, exactly how we're going to pay for it so that it's real, so that we can deliver genuinely affordable housing, because too many people are leaving the city because they can't afford it or they're struggling while they're here. That's not acceptable. We have to deal with it. And we have to, it's not the public versus the private sector. We have to do both. And we have to be more effective and results-oriented no matter what we do. That's the real solution. And ultimately,
Josh.
I appreciate your support.
Thanks, Josh. Mitzi Hunter.
So I'm running for mayor of Toronto to lead Toronto's revival as a city that will work for everyone everywhere in the city. I understand what it's like being on the outside. I grew up in Scarborough. That's where I've represented for the last 10 years. And there's so many people that want a stronger voice in City Hall. The same is not gonna, we should not be promoting people who have given us the mess that we're in right now. That is not gonna work. We need a change and we need a difference in our city. I also don't believe coming to the voters without a plan is acceptable. You've had the time, you've had the experience, and the numbers are there, but yet they haven't been produced. I have provided a plan. It's available. You can download it, and it is costed, and it presents a vision for our city with 6 priorities so that we can have a city that we want, where young people, young adults can afford to live here, where we fix things like affordable housing, transit, and services. More importantly, in this election, it's about change. It is time for a generational change in Toronto, and we can do this. There is a clear choice. I'm running to be your mayor to help fix the 6. Number 55 on that ballot. It is a long ballot. I voted on the weekend. It's in the center column. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitzi Hunter. Brad Bradford.
Thanks very much. I appreciate all of you being here today. Last Monday, a week ago, our second daughter was born. And I can tell you, for those of you who have had the privilege and the honor of bringing somebody into the world, it is a moment for reflection. And that was very emotional, of course, as it is. But you think about the city that we're building. We think about what's at stake. We think about the conversations that we're having right now about affordability, about safety, about getting around Toronto. And what is it going to look like 5, 10, 20 years from now? We've heard from so many students, young folks on this campaign, about their hopes and their aspirations for the city. And yet, time and time again, I hear stories of folks having to move out of Toronto, moving out to Hamilton because they can't afford to live here anymore. I'm an urban planner by training. My passion is cities. I'm trained professionally. I worked in the chief planner's office. That was my experience. I saw what wasn't working. I saw a lack of accountability. I saw a culture of endless debate, deferral, delay. Olivia Chow just pointed out that things haven't happened with the city. It takes too long to get things done. You're smart, pragmatic people. You know that the answer to more housing is not more government. It's about tackling the questions and understanding why we haven't been getting things done, being hard on those problems, looking for the unlock, and working with the not-for-profit sector and the builders to help unleash more housing, because housing is access to opportunity. We need affordable housing here in the city. We need more opportunity for people. Vote for Brad Bradford on June 26th, and we will get that done together. Number 17 on the ballot.
Thank you, Brad Bradford. Final candidate with final thoughts, Anna Bilow.
Thank you. Today the debate was about housing. I say the debate was about the social and economic health of our city and of our residents. That's what it means. When we talk about housing, it's about making sure that we attract the brightest and the best. It's making sure that we have our youth, our families being able to live here, that we move here, that we stay close to our work, that we continue to attract investment. That is the essence of Toronto. That's why I'm so passionate about this. When I talk about the opportunity when I came here at 15 and I want people to have, is that opportunity that I know the stability of a home gives you. The stability that knowing that you're gonna be okay. That's why my plan is about fixing services, but building housing so we can make people's lives easier, more affordable, so they see themselves in this city. So this can be a city of opportunity. And we have a clear choice. You have Olivia Chow that sees every answer for every problem is a tax and doesn't believe in working with the private sector. Or you have me, Anna Bilow. I have experience. I have a track record. I bring council together. I bring other orders of government together. I bring labor and I bring business together. And that's the kind of leadership that you need in this city right now to tackle housing, to tackle transit, to tackle our budget. No one is going to solve housing on its own. We need 3 orders of government to tackle this. We all have responsibility on it. We have a housing crisis across the country. And we need
you,
a
Anna.
leader that is going to work with other municipalities across the country on this issue as well.
Thank you, Anna Bilow, and thank you to all of our candidates today.
Thank you.
Thank you to those who joined us online. Thank you to everyone who came in person as well to take in this conversation. This debate was organized by the University of Toronto's School of Cities, Canadian Urban Institute, and the Urban Land Institute. A reminder, in total, there are how many candidates?
102.
102 running to be your mayor. Election day, I'll remind you, is exactly 2 weeks from today. Advance voting is underway and goes until tomorrow. You can advance vote at any polling station in the city from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm Mayoral Candidates, host of CBC Toronto News at 6. Thank you all once again. Have a great rest of your day.
Good job.